welcome everyone to this BCS Agile Methods event. This is our August offering for you all. We're thrilled to bring you this event. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Avipaul Singh. I'm the chair of BCS Agile Methods. I'm joined by Ahmad, who's our treasurer. We are expecting other members of our committee to join in due course as well. Some are probably just finishing up their working day, all the rest of it, so others will arrive shortly. So thank you all, very warm welcome to you. We have a very simple kind of code of conduct here. We just simply ask that you're respectful of one another. Want everyone to have a really good experience. Here's Martin now. As if by magic, since Martin just joins, I'll give us a wave, Martin. Martin's part of our committee as well, BCS Agile Methods, and he's the early careers advocate. He plays an officer role on our committee. Welcome, Martin. So as I said, you're very simple code of conduct. That's all we ask, just be respectful to one another. We'll do some announcements, etc. at the end. A few things just to share with you all that we've got in the pipeline. And yeah, well, in terms of questions, I'm going to hand over to our speaker in a second. If you do have any questions that come up along the way, just feel free to drop them in the chat facility. If you can prefix it with a Q, it allows us to kind of spot them and sift through them if there's other comments and engagement in the chat. And then once our speakers have the opportunity the session, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So we usually have about 20-25 minutes at the end for Q&A, so plenty of time to take some questions. I'm delighted to welcome Avipaul Bandari to BCS Agile Methods. I've known Avi for a few years now. Our paths crossed 2 years ago. We were both speakers at Lean Agile Edinburgh, Lean Agile London even, conference. Helps if I get the right city. So that's been the last 2 years, 2022, we met again earlier this year in 2023. Really enjoyed chats with Avi, and I've heard him speak on a few occasions, and he's a fantastic speaker. He talks about things that are also of interest to me, and I think a lot of the talks are very centered around the human aspects of what many of us try to do in how we apply Agile principles and practices within workplaces. He's an established experience, Agile practitioner, coach, professional. He's been doing this for 20 odd years, so he's got extensive experience. And today is going to be talking to us about a systemic approach to empathy, which I think is a fascinating topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. So without further ado, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction. Let me just share my screen. I believe you can all see that now. Great. So yes, systematic approach to empathy. And you've already mentioned a couple of things already about me. So just a bit of an intro about myself. Been doing this Agile thing for about 20 years, started as a developer, and I have I've moved around a fair deal, especially as a contractor in recent years. Worked in big companies, small companies, everywhere in between. I've been called lots of things such as engineer, program lead, etc. I've also been in engineering leadership for a few of the roles, but mostly I would self-identify as a Scrum Master or an Agile coach, depending on the context. You might see some colorful things on here. So the brain with the color on it. I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. So the whole neurodiversity thing is, it's new to me, but I have a great deal of empathy for people who are neurodivergent, and I feel we should do more in this space, but that's subject for a different talk. And you'll see the people in the circle going round and round. And having worked in the industry for so many years, and having done this job, I would say that the human connection is core to being successful, not only in your roles, but also just making roles enjoyable for yourselves, and also it leads to success. And business tends to be, it can be a bit cutthroat. So there are some firms where culture is a little cutthroat. So you might turn up on a Monday and you find out your manager's been sacked, or A team's being laid off and they're given 1 hour's notice to clean their desks out, and we're just told this is part of corporate culture and everything. There's another way. There's another way of doing this. We can do this in a lot more of a kind of human focused way, and just be kind to each other, and question some of the things that we just accept as norms nowadays. But yeah, oh, and I also do some music, so you can type in my first name on Spotify, and that's a bit of self-promotion there. This is the agenda. So I'm going to talk about Agile coaching, Scrum Master, and also challenges for leadership. I think given the fact that we're servant leaders, this also applies to roles in leadership. We're going to look at what empathy is, also look at some of the science behind it, and I'll explain what I mean by a systematic approach. And then we're going to look at how we can apply empathy at different levels, from individuals through to team, organizations, and customer, etc. So the Scrum Master and Agile coach roles are quite challenging. There is a focus on servant leadership, and there is an expectation that team effectiveness will be impacted by us. We're there to impart Agile knowledge, and the roles have the potential to result in increased productivity, increased value delivery, impacting the structure and processes, improve team dynamics and transparency, morale, lots of good things, right? But in reality, we have to navigate a lot of different things based on which organization we're in, and the challenges will be different per organization as well. So a company's tech stack, or a company's culture, or team structures, everything, it impacts how effective we are. And I would say that, if I can get this into the next slide, a lot of what we experience is also true. A lot of our challenges are also experienced by leadership as well. And so whereas Agile coaches and Scrum Masters, we don't have a directive approach. We're there to influence. We can't tell the teams what to do. We're there to influence the teams. Whereas leaders may have a bit more of a kind of directive approach, that they can set policies, but it might be the case that they set policies, but they're not always listened to. And I've definitely seen that in some of the companies that I work with. And resistance, I feel, is inevitable. There's a bit of a Star Trek reference there, if anyone is familiar with the Borg. And every job I've had as an Agile coach and a Scrum Master, and speaking with others in the same field, there's always met with a level of resistance. And I'm going to be talking about examples from my own experience here. So depending on where in the organization, the nature of the resistance will be different. So for example, a developer might say to me, oh, I don't really see the point in me fleshing out this user story with detail and acceptance criteria. I know what to do. I'm just going to do the work. And then you'll see them taking a lot longer, and you'll see it snowball into something which it was never intended to be. One company that I joined as an Agile coach, a developer came up to me and said, I hate Agile. I'm not sure what they were trying to achieve with that, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Teams, again, something I've heard from teams is, we have too many meetings. Why are there so many meetings? Why do we need a retrospective? Why can't we just get on with the real work? That's a level of resistance that I've experienced. Leadership often think what we're doing applies to just teams at team level. They don't realize, they might not realize, depending on the org and the leader, that it will benefit them, it will benefit the organization to approach Agile at a holistic level, or how it might even benefit them. Some things I've been said. So a CEO once said to me, you're very dogmatic. And that took me by surprise. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but the way that company went, maybe they should have listened to me. But that's just ego. And I've been told by a director of product, hey, everything you say makes sense in theory. And so it's as if to kind of diminish the value of it. So this is the kind of level of resistance I've met, and it can make you feel a bit limited and caged in, and you're kind of trapped and unable to affect change. we suffer, we're not able to bring the value that we could potentially bring. So all the good things that I talked about, increased value delivery and increased morale and all these good things, we're not able to bring that about. So we suffer, we're frustrated in our roles, and the company suffers as well. So what can help us overcome this resistance? You've guessed it, empathy. And I'm just going to do the standard dictionary definition of what empathy is. Action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of others. Feel free to add questions in the chat, and we can get onto them at the end. Benefits from empathy, from my perspective, and the reason why I'm talking about this is it helps us overcome some of this resistance. It's again back to that human connection that I talked about at the start. Reduce conflict within the teams, improving relationships, collaboration, improve performance. So this isn't just empathy on a one-to-one basis. This is about creating a culture of empathy as well. This is what I find really interesting. We think of empathy as a soft skill, but actually it has scientific roots. So there are mirror neurons which fire in our brain, and this is a University of Parma in Italy. They discovered this with monkeys, and it's true of humans. So when we see someone smiling, our mirror neurons start smiling, and we're like, hey, we're feeling the same thing now. So we instinctively respond because of our mirror neurons. And when I actually met Seth at the Lean Agile London talk, I did a quick experiment as an icebreaker where I put people in pairs, and I said, you're person A and person B. And I asked person A to tell a story or talk about something that really brings them joy. And then I asked person B to analyze person A, really look at their facial expressions, a tone of voice, and how they're talking about things. And then afterwards, I asked person B, what did you feel when you heard them talking about that? And they said, I felt happy. And that was their mirror neurons. That's called neural resonance. And so that worked in a talk. And so I was quite happy with how that turned out. Different types of empathy. So there's affective, which is how we respond to another's emotions and recognize them. Somatic is, so if you see someone whack their thumb with a hammer, we will have a physical response to that. So it's a physical response. And cognitive, which is about the mental state and how they might be thinking. Sometimes it's called theory of mind. And Borat, as in Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin, Sir Simon Baron Cohen, is an expert in this field, a psychologist. He's done lots of research, and he's actually done some really interesting research in this area, and go check it out. For the talk, we're going to be focusing on affective and cognitive, less of the physical, unless like you might drop a server on your toe or something, if that's what might happen at work. Just a question to people, and I'm not sure if I can see the chat. Oh, we have yeah. Do you think we have more or less empathy than we did 30 years ago? If you want to, okay, Alex, quick in there with the less. Sasma with more, Ali with less. Okay, so we're getting a bit of a split here. Any more thoughts? Okay. That's a really good point. And we'll come on to that, Martin. We have less. According to research, University of Michigan, we have less empathy than before. And they researched this over about 30 years, I think from 1980s onwards. And they found that Americans today are less empathetic than 75% of Americans 30 years ago. So it's a worrying trend. And also post-COVID, we have something called compassion fatigue. So yeah, we're not in a great state right now, which is why it's all the more important to actually be talking about this stuff. Now, what do I mean by a systematic approach? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover some tips and approach to develop empathy on a one-to-one level, on an individual level. And then I'm going to be looking at how we would apply that at various levels of a business. So individuals, team, leadership, the wider organization, and empathy for the customers. And what we find is there's an overlap between the top three, and they actually influence the bottom two, which is the nature of how things work. And we'll start with the individuals first. And just talking about the talk I gave at Lean Agile London last year. So I talked about a one-to-one format, which was based in coaching, mostly coaching and a bit of mentoring. And I talked about how this coaching approach actually led to improvements in performance for individuals, but also across the teams and across the group in terms of their morale and their happiness, etc., and their performance. And what I can say to Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, please don't underestimate the value of one-to-ones. They're so important, and also the importance of taking a coaching approach. Now, the question that I would ask at the start is, what would you like to discuss? And immediately you understood their perspective. What are they passionate about? What annoys them? What makes them happy? You're immediately understanding them. And this is where you can develop empathy for them. This is information that wouldn't have surfaced otherwise. People are less likely to share it within groups. And people feel valued as well. You're taking time out and asking them what's important to them. So that was one of the benefits. Dr. Teresa Wiseman has identified 4 attributes of empathy, and you might have seen Brené Brown talking about these as well. Taking on someone else's perspective, being non-judgmental, recognizing another's emotion and understanding their feelings, and communicating your understanding of another's feelings. And we're just going to break those down a little. So taking on another person's perspective or putting yourself in their shoes. So they might have, and this is where it's challenging for us as Agile coaches, and this is where we meet resistance. So they might have a diametrically opposed opinion to you. So I hate Agile is what was said to me by this guy. Now I could have just turned around and said, look, like, mate, Agile's my job. I hate you, right? That could have been a perfectly valid response, but that's not what I said. I wanted to know why this person thought it was okay for him to say what he said to me. And so I had to kind of remove any judgment, right? I wanted to understand, I had curiosity as to why he said what he said. Now, what had happened was he was in an organization just before he came to this job, and he said that consultants had come in and they'd moved everyone over to Scrum, they'd done some training, and then they left. They didn't really tell people how to work on a day-to-day basis with it. So it kind of left them in a bad place. So that was a bad experience of Agile. No, I'm not saying all consultants are like that. It was just his specific experience. And therefore, he didn't see any value. It was just disruptive, and they learned nothing, and they wasted a lot of time. So therefore, he hated Agile. So now I have empathy for him. And then we actually developed quite a good relationship after that. And so, I obviously asked him what was important to him and how he wanted to improve his particular processes and his ways of working and with his team. And that was a really fruitful relationship. So yeah, that was a potentially threatening situation where I could have responded in and it could have gone worse. But I showed curiosity. I was non-judgmental, and it led to good outcomes. So people hold these opinions and thoughts for reasons. So you've got to give them the benefit of the doubt. What does it look like to be non-judgmental? And this is where we need to be very aware of ourselves. And this is where we need to recognize others' emotions and understand their feelings. And this might seem quite obvious, but non-verbal language communication. So what are their faces saying? What are their expressions saying? And we can see here someone looks quite sad, someone's quite happy, someone's quite angry, and someone's obviously ecstatic because they've got the body language as well. But as they're talking to you, and as he said, I hate Agile, I could have easily have had an angry face, but I stayed quite neutral, right? I wanted to make sure I didn't communicate something to him which might put him off. So it's important to recognize the energy you're getting from others, the non-verbal communication you're getting from others. You can identify when they're angry. And this is really important if you're giving someone feedback, to recognize these traits as well. And to be honest, people feel strongly at work. We usually care about what we're doing. And so we will have emotional reactions, and you'll see that written on faces as well. Another thing to be very conscious of is tone of voice. And this, it might seem very obvious again. Another thing is, I can talk about these things. Obviously, when you're angry, your voice gets louder and it's more aggressive, and it's people are not feeling very confident and the voice gets a bit quiet, etc. But if you're not looking out for these things specifically, then you might miss these things. So what I would say is, in our jobs as coaches and Scrum Masters, etc., or even as leaders, we should pay attention to these small details, and then it becomes more obvious. So in the exercise for neural resonance that I did at the talk last year, I asked people specifically, pay attention to this and this. If they hadn't done, maybe they wouldn't have. In fact, that's what the science says. If you're not paying attention to that, you're less likely for your neurons to fire off, and for you to feel that joy or feel what the other person is feeling. So do pay attention to these things in your one-to-ones or with the teams as well. Let me move on. Listening is really important as well. So psychotherapy research shows that when people feel listened to, they become less defensive, and they're more willing to accept other perspectives. So there are 3 levels of listening. There's internal listening, where we're listening to respond. So an example of this would be, oh, you went on holiday. Oh, that's great. We went on holiday too. I was just in Northern Ireland the other day. Listening to understand. Oh, you went on holiday. Right, where did you go? Great. Why did you choose that place? Oh, they got childcare. Great, that's good to know. So you're listening intently, you're observing the non-verbals, and you're picking up on the general energy. And then global listening, and this is, I guess, a Star Wars reference. This is where you're using the Force, you're using intuition. You're listening to what isn't being said. So, okay, you went on holiday there, great. Did you enjoy it? Great. You can see from the expression whether they enjoyed it. Oh, why was it important for you to pick that place? They got childcare, great. Okay, so need a break for your children, maybe, or some, you wouldn't actually say that, but you know what I'm saying. You pick up on information that they wouldn't necessarily surface immediately on a superficial conversation. What's really important as well is that they know that you've understood them. So you communicate your understanding of their feelings. And sometimes this is just repeating back exactly what you've heard, or sometimes it's paraphrasing. So if I've heard something from them, let's just say, for example, okay, I used to be a developer, not particularly technical now, but I will repeat back what I've heard, and I'll repeat back exact technical terminology that they've used. And then they know that I understand them. You might want to paraphrase it, put it in a different way, to show that there's comprehension as well. But this is really crucial. When they hear that you've understood them, then again, the barriers come down. So this is all about overcoming that resistance. Another tip, and some of us do this subconsciously, is to not only observe body language, but to mirror. And it sends a subconscious signal to them that says, hey, we're the same. And people pick up on that, right? This is true in the animal kingdom. They notice animals would mirror each other's body language as well. It can be done with speech patterns and tempo and vocabulary as well. And yeah, it is powerful. Again, it's about breaking down those barriers. Now, all of this leads to better relationships. So what I've observed as an Agile coach and Scrum Master is sometimes we go to companies and we have an idea of what worked well in the last job, and we try to recreate that in this job. And so we come in and we will kind of use a cookie cutter approach sometimes. And so I've worked in companies where the previous Scrum Master may have just tried to implement vanilla Scrum, and that led them to be, to get a lot of resistance and to be kind of chewed up and kind of spat out and, aggressively. And if by using some of these techniques, you can overcome that. You can understand what's important to people. Now, I want to point out that this isn't just a cynical approach to influence people. This isn't like, hey, a trick to like, now we're going to go into this org and we're going to make everyone think like us. That's not the idea. And so, I wouldn't have been able to make the progress that I have so far if I wasn't able to do this. Some of the aggression that I've met and the resistance I've met, it has been quite harsh, being shouted into a corner because of the fact I set up a retrospective. Really just on the receiving end of some vitriol at times. And we need to be able to show that we see past that, we don't judge, and we ask them questions about their perspective and understand them. And actually, some of the people that have been most resistant are the people I've been closest to after going through this process. Some of you may have heard of this book, Never Split the Difference, where Chris Voss, he was an FBI negotiator and he negotiated with terrorists, etc. And he talks about something called tactical empathy. And what he talks about is if you label an emotion, so someone is angry or they're getting frustrated with what you're saying. So, oh, story points, I don't understand them, I'm getting angry. You label that emotion. So you would say, I can see you becoming frustrated by the fact that we're talking about story points. And what that does, it takes it from their fight or flight part of their brain, the amygdala, which is the kind of animalistic part of the brain. And then by labeling the emotion, it takes it to the prefrontal cortex, which is the more rational part of the brain. And there they're able to process things a bit more intelligently. And it's more rational. And then it becomes an actual conversation. And then they're more likely to listen to you and process what you're saying. So this is part of the whole re-articulating and repeating back, but it's also labeling emotions, which is an important part of it. Just bear with me. I mentioned neurodiversity at the start, and what I would say here is I'm not going to make any generalizations, but sometimes people are just hardwired different, and sometimes people will show less empathy than others. And these techniques may work or they may not. And what I would say is just take things on an individual case-by-case basis. Don't get frustrated with people. Just have empathy for them and understand that their brains are just wired differently. And this might go for different personality types as well. So you've got introverts and extroverts, etc. So that covers the individuals. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take those concepts and apply them at different levels now. So empathy for the team. So when I join a team, what I try to do is understand where they're at now. And there's the old kind of Kanban phrase of saying, it's evolution, not revolution. So what you want to do is understand their perspectives, and retrospectives, everyone knows how great they are if you're in the orgs. I've seen people I've seen teams or organizations that don't have retrospectives, which really surprised me. But if you want to understand what people are feeling, just run a good retro and their feelings will surface. And that's a way of putting yourselves in their shoes. But also just be conscious of the fact that, it's iterative change that we're after. I joined a job once where they'd received some coaching from a Scrum Master who told them, and it was a university, and they had quite archaic systems, and which is true for most universities. Bear with me. And so, but this previous Scrum Master said, hey, you guys need to adopt CI/CD, right? You guys need to have fully automated test suites. Otherwise, you can't do this Agile thing. It's just a waste, right? Now, coming in, they already had complained about that. So I realized that wasn't something that they were going to be doing. And obviously, as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, this is fantastic. I've been in a job where they had full CI/CD released multiple times a day, and it was great, fantastic. But that wasn't the truth there, right? So we had to start there. And there were plenty of other benefits to introducing Agile and Scrum than just that. So we introduced the frameworks and they had the stand-ups, etc. And once they realized, that they couldn't really get much done within the iterations, then we started talking about, okay, what automation can we introduce? And they started talking about test suites and stuff. and all that goodness. But it's important to have empathy for where they are. And another Star Wars reference. As someone who has moved from job to job, with contracting, etc. I like this story of Donald Glover meeting Billy D. Williams with regards to the role of Lando Calrissian. So they both played the same role. Billy D. Williams played it in the original trilogy, and Donald Glover played it in the recent Han Solo film, and I think he's got a series coming out. But he met Billy D. Williams, and he was like, "Hey, I want to get inside this character. Give me some tips. I want to know what this character's about. How do I embody him?" And Billy D. Williams is like, "I don't know, just be charming." It's like, is that it? It's like, and that I relate to that story because I'm not saying be charming. I'm saying be affable. When we turn up, it's important to gauge the culture and be affable to that culture. So an example is I was in a team once and two contractors joined at the same time. One of them, it felt as though they'd been in that team for months, if not years. They just fit right in. And the other one was quite jarring. And even though their technical ability was similar, one of them was a lot more popular and accepted within the team because, and I believe they did this intentionally. They gauged the culture, they saw how people were behaving, they understood the language that people were using, and they adopted the same. And they were just generally quite affable about it. So you don't walk in and say, all right, we're going to use story points and that's it. And I've had my say, this is how we're going to work. It's about understanding the culture that's already there and being affable to that. And I hope the Star Wars reference wasn't too much of a stretch. In my last talk that I gave recently, I actually missed a slide on psychological safety, and the feedback I had was, oh, please do include that slide on psychological safety. So here I am, I've learned from that, and I've included it in this because I think it's important, and it's part of developing empathy. So a lot of you are probably aware of the Google research that was done a few years ago, Project Aristotle, where they discovered the overriding factor to team success and productivity is psychological safety. Now, Google talked about it as equality in conversational turn-taking. Amy Edmondson, who's a behavioral psychologist who came up with the phrase, talks about it being the fact that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So you're not going to be punished or humiliated speaking up with your ideas or sharing your ideas. And I do believe that this is really important to creating an environment of empathy. And I think it's on us as Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and leaders to actually create an environment of psychological safety. And one way of doing that is actually admitting to your mistakes as leaders. So what I did at the start of the slide was I said, oh, I messed up in my last presentation. I had feedback, but now I've learned from that. And now I've made sure I include that in this slide. So that's an example of making a mistake and learning from it. And as leaders, that's what we need to do. And psychological safety isn't just about being nice to each other. It's not just a case of, well, I've spoken up and I've shared my thoughts and everyone was nice to me about it. It's actually about being able to challenge each other and doing it in a way that's constructive and non-threatening. So it isn't just a case of I'm going to contribute my idea to this conversation. It's like I contribute it and I expect to be challenged. And that's fine. But the more ideas that surface, the better. We're going to learn from each other, right? Something that I do also with teams to help them with this and to develop empathy for each other is actually provide some training on how to have constructive conversations and deliver feedback. And so there's plenty of models to use out there. What I talk about is, again, the need to show empathy for each other when giving feedback, to show that you understand the other person's perspective. And so what happens and what I found is when people practice giving feedback one-to-one within teams, it becomes easier for them to challenge each other in group conversation and team conversations. Something that happened in a previous role is I would have these one-to-ones and I with everyone in the teams in a group, and I shared my format with them, and then they just started having one-to-ones with each other, and they would challenge each other and they would learn from each other. And then it became a culture of feedback. And so more people were actively doing it, and they did it intentionally, and then they were much more comfortable challenging each other in the team scenarios. Another way to develop empathy for your team is just to understand them. And I'm sure many of you have run team canvas workshops before, where you understand their team goals and their team values and understand their roles. You also understand their personal values, their strengths and weaknesses. It's them driving this, right? You're not dictating this. You're not setting their goals for them. This is something that they do for themselves. And if you run this well, it can surface a lot of information, and then that's information for you to then understand their perspectives and then have empathy for them. An example of something that came out in one of these sessions was a team I worked with didn't like having large, long planning meetings with everyone there. So they broke that down into smaller planning meetings with fewer people, like 3 amigos, where they would break the user stories off and assign them to each other. And then they felt those were more productive than having one large, long planning meeting. And then they came back and compared notes later. Team health checks, again, not revolutionary, but again, it's a way to surface information within the teams, and there are different formats you can use. What I would say is you should use the information, you should surface it and show that you're doing something with it. But it's also great to understand what they're feeling. That covers teams, and now leadership. And so this is kind of split into two. This is about us having empathy for leaders and how that helps us. And it's the importance of empathy in leadership. And I'm sure this isn't controversial, but sometimes from experience, I found leadership can sometimes be the ones to throw the spanner in the works for us. So for example, they might not understand what it is we do. They might not understand why we're taking a specific approach. They might not understand Agile particularly well. Sometimes something I've experienced is where leadership have used Agile as a tool to punish people. So there would be a Friday walk around where they would come to each team and they would say, okay, show us your burn downs. Oh, you're way off target. Why is that? And it felt very uncomfortable. It was like they were punishing teams. And also, if leadership don't trust people, they're like, I want to see all your tickets on the board. Why is that person not putting their tickets on the board? So, well, they're a product owner. They don't work on the board. They work in the backlog. I've also seen leadership maybe not understanding the importance of prioritization and just changing priorities on a whim based on what one customer might say, and then giving your team unreasonable deadlines, and that makes it impossible to deliver something on time or of quality. Or sometimes I've seen leadership talk at all hands and say something which lack any empathy, and then the rest of us are basically playing damage control afterwards. But it's up to us to have empathy for them. I know all that stuff I just explained might sound frustrating and would really be upsetting if you care about your job and being able to do your job well. And if leadership are doing it, then it really kind of I'll go home and I'll complain and wonder what I'm doing there, etc. But we really they're people too, right? We need to have empathy for them. They're not doing these things just to annoy people. What pressures are they under? What financial pressures are they under? What targets do they need to meet? What's the board of investors saying to them? Maybe they're not seeing the results that they're expecting, and maybe that's the only way they know of how to act out. So really understand their motivations. And again, this is communicating your understanding. So if you are able to access them, if you are able to speak with them, show them that you understand, use their language. What are their main concerns? So when I go back to that conversation with the director of product saying, everything you say makes sense in theory, I admit I took that personally. And what I should have done is actually question that. I said, okay, what are you trying to achieve? How can I help you achieve your goals? So it became less of a textbook answer and more about reality. What are they actually trying to do? And this is how we can approach some of these conversations. It's like, what are the actual business problems that they're trying to solve? If they're into Agile and they understand all the Agile terminology, I've had a manager where I've talked about limiting weapon Kanban and love it, absolutely love it. But others, they don't care, and they just want to hear language that will work for them. How is this actually gonna help them? Examples would be, yeah, I was working in a company where I was the only Agile coach, and I wanted to hire a team of Agile coaches, and I was able to justify my case by using data, and that really resonated with my manager. Once he saw, and I used flow metrics, once he saw reduction in cycle time, once he saw throughput being impacted, and more predictability around the work, then he understood what that meant, right? And so that was evidence of work that I've been doing with the teams. And he's like, yeah, great, let's hire some more. So using data, using language that they understand, it could be business metrics, but not necessarily using your Agile terminology if they don't get it. That can help you. And that's, again, showing empathy for what they care about, right? We understand what we're good at. We understand the value it brings, but they might not, right? So put it in real terms. Oops, just skipped one. Yeah, so this is where we talk about the importance of empathy in leadership. So a survey was done recently by a company called Catalyst, and basically across the board, everything was better if you had empathetic leadership. So improved innovation, improved engagement, retention was better, inclusivity and work-life. People felt they were able to manage their work-life balance better if their leaders showed them empathy. And so where I could go back to an example of very senior people saying things in all hands, which showed very little empathy for people, then people will be less motivated. Like, wait, I've just worked so hard, and then that person just completely diminished the good work that we've been doing. That's an example of not having empathy. But leaders, managers with empathy leads to better business results as well. Organization. So again, we're going to look at structure, culture, communication, and we're going to take the same approach as we have before. I've worked in organizations where people have dressed a certain way, so dressed in suits, and they've been very business-minded and results-driven, and very alpha and very aggressive with each other in their meetings. Then I've worked in places where they're very casual, wear t-shirts, and it doesn't matter where you work from as long as you're working, right? It doesn't matter what hours you work, very relaxed. And they're keeping things, they intentionally don't use corporate speak, very different. And what I would say coming into a culture is you don't want to, this is again referencing the Donald Glover thing, be affable, right? You've got to be able to adjust to the tone in that place. And I'm saying this as someone who works as a contractor. People need to see that you're credible. So it's that whole mirroring thing. So understand the culture in a company, mirror it, bring down the barriers, and then you can influence it. There are different cultural models you can use. I like to reference the Western typology model, which has 3 different types of cultures. One is generative. This is the good one, where it's nice, highly cooperative, and it's performance focused, and failures are embraced and learned from. And bureaucratic, which is a bit more rule oriented and less cooperation. Pathological, which is all about power building and low cooperation, and failure isn't tolerated and messengers are punished and all that kind of stuff. And the main distinction between them is obviously how failure is dealt with, but also the flow of information there. I was in one company where I shared this model with one of the founders. He really loved it. And there's one of the things that they say is for a generative model, failure leads to inquiry. And we're going to learn from failure. Except when he started saying it, failure leads to inquiry, it was a very different connotation because of the culture that was in place there, right? And so we've got to be very aware of the culture there and how we should navigate that as well. But I would recommend reading up on this. It's very useful. Communication and structure makes a big difference as well. And this relates to empathy as well. So going back to psychology, there's this concept of in-group and out-group. So for example, if you're in sales, your in-group is a sales group, out-group is product and engineering. We will have more empathy for the people in our in-group and maybe even discriminate against those who are in the out-group. And so we have to be very careful about the structures that we build and the communication channels as well. And so one thing that I've seen in multiple companies is sales will have very little visual understanding or communication of what's happening in product or engineering. They've got their own targets to meet and they're rewarded on these targets. So for them, if their customer wants such and such feature and they're driven and sales are driven for that sale, then they will promise them that feature. And it's not a feature that's on any roadmap, right? And I've seen this happen time and time again. Sales will commit to features which are not even being thought of or on the roadmap for product and engineering. And then I've even seen in organizations where product and engineering will have their own targets and goals, which might not be aligned with each other. Like engineering, we're talking about tech debt and improving the tech stack and all these cool things, but that might not align with what product wants to achieve from a product perspective by the end of the quarter or whatever. So these need to be aligned, and we need to create the right communication channels where these groups of people can work together and not see these lines and barriers between themselves and actually have empathy for each other's goals and support each other. And ultimately, they should be working towards the same goals anyway, because they're all part of the same company. So essentially what I'm saying is I've seen organizations where structures have prevented any empathy for each other, and it becomes us versus them, and we need to break that down. Surveys, again, it's an obvious one. If you want to understand how people feel, surveys are good. We need to be careful with these because if we're expecting people to spend an hour every quarter to fill in a survey and then we might show some results and then not do anything with it, then that's a waste of their time and people will be less inclined to participate. So there's different ways of doing these. You might do like, kind of a short kind of thing, which like takes 2 seconds. It's a question every now and then, but you need to show that you're doing something with the information. But it's a great way to learn about how people are feeling. And now we're talking about customers. And what I would say here is, as coaches, Scrum Masters, we need to be able to help our POs understand and have empathy for our end users and articulate the customer needs. And Agile, in its very nature, at its heart, has empathy for the customer there, right? So customer collaboration over contract negotiation, that's a value, right? And then the principles talk about priority is satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery. And what we get through that early and continuous delivery is we get feedback. So we put something out there, we get feedback, we understand what's working, we understand the mindset of the customer. And this one I don't really see as often as I should. Business people and developers working together daily throughout the project. That's just so that we can have, so developers can have empathy for the business people and create the right thing for them. And there's other techniques. We can use MVPs and prototyping, etc. I did work in an organization where the engineering team was sitting with their customers, and that was fantastic in theory, but when I got there, no one was actually talking to each other, and they actually thought the engineering people were there to fix their computers and stuff. So we ensured that we got them talking with each other, we got them included in the Scrum events, and then actually asked a team to actually dog food what the engineering team was working on. That became very collaborative, and it turned into a great product, which actually, the backlog started like this, but the more they collaborated, they realized we didn't need half of that because this actually does what we need. And it was quite innovative and was adopted by the whole group of customers, and that was a really great experience of breaking down those barriers and work collaborating on a day-to-day basis. I thought I'd mention this. There's a tool called an empathy map, which I found really useful. It's a great one to understand your customers. So you'd actually work through this and understand and ask yourself, what's the customer thinking and feeling, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're saying, what are their pains, what are their gains. I've actually done this. I've used this actually between two teams that didn't get along, and this actually worked surprisingly well, where they're able to speak each other's minds and repeat back to each other what they were feeling, and they were like, wow, it's like you know us. And that really did help relationships. I did work for Microsoft as well, and I worked there before this man took over, and I liked what he did. So he talks about empathy openly. So Satya Nadella, CEO, and he kind of made it an innovation agenda and essentially a business strategy. So obviously back in the day, Microsoft, well, they still are competitors, but Apple and Google are competitors, and they would make sure none of their software was on Apple OS or Google OS. But then they realized their customers were using those devices. So it was like, actually, let's give our customers our software where they are. So we're not going to try and force them to use our ecosystem, but let's put our software on others, on the ecosystem of others. So that was showing empathy for the customer, and then they become a lot more successful as a result. So yeah, good things happen there, with a big focus on customer. We need to be cautious though, and I know I've been talking about things from a theoretical perspective, but I did talk about how painful sometimes these things are. So if we care about our work, having someone who completely resists our approach can really have an emotional trigger with us, for us. And if we're talking to people, feelings will come up, and sometimes it becomes quite a lot. If you're asking people about how they're feeling, etc., emotions will surface. So you want to make sure you're not a sponge for others' emotions. It can be overwhelming. Empathy fatigue is a real thing, cause exhaustion and emotional, physical issues, particularly if other people are going through stressful events. And what I would say in general, and I think this is good advice for anyone taking on the kind of Agile or Scrum Master roles, is to have resilience. And so, again, we're met with resistance. Anger is directed towards us. We need to let it wash over us. Again, no judgment, retain that approach of no judgment, even if others are angry. And I'll admit, I have responded negatively at times when, for example, a leader hasn't shown empathy for people in their teams. That annoys me. I need to ask myself the question, why is this annoying me? Why are they doing it this way? Understand their perspective, etc. So we're all human, right? So we're all human. Our work can get stressful. It's really important that we establish ways to stay resilient. So just summarizing, these are the core kind of tools, I guess. There's 4 attributes. So understanding someone else's perspective, recognizing their emotions, being non-judgmental, communicating your understanding. And then we've got these different things to recognize in non-verbal communication, so the tone of their voice. And there's some tools about listening, active listening, global listening, repeating back what you hear, and then essentially applying these at all levels of the organization. And what I would say is, if you keep it cool, you keep resilient, yeah, you hold on to your approach of non-judgment, and you employ these tools, then it will really help in becoming successful, not only with teams, but across organizations and with companies and cultures as well. And at that point, I'm going to say, any questions?
Thanks, Abby. That was really, really good. You certainly had me with the empathy. What do you call it? The empathy fatigue, because I think I've probably suffered from a bit of that. There was a question I did see. I haven't seen many, so we can open it up to the phone a second. There was one from Olivia early on. Found it. How to deal with leaders who cannot admit a mistake and come up with all sorts of rationales to justify their original mistake.
I would say understand why they're coming up with these rationales. Again, I know we expect humility from leaders, but we can't always expect it, right? And this is where I've imposed my own values on others, and I become disappointed with others when I haven't seen them acting in a way that I would expect them to act. but I think we need to ask them why are they doing this, and also if you're able to ask them some probing questions, well, not exploratory questions. What is it that they're trying to achieve? So I would say maybe don't focus on the mistake itself, but just focus on what it is they're trying to achieve and see if you can make progress that way. Does that make sense?
Does that help, Olivia? You're welcome to unmute and enjoy the conversation. Yes, you're getting a yes.
Great.
Excellent. Brilliant. Yeah, okay, that's good. What else have we got? I didn't see any other questions. We're going to raise hands as well, folks, if you'd like. And then we can lead you in and you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you've got a question you'd rather ask verbally rather than stick it in the chat. You're welcome.
I've had a question directly, sorry.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, from Kim Edwin. I'm not sure which way the name around it is, which way. When discussing evolution, not revolution, you mentioned run a good retro. What does that last phrase mean? Okay, so is the question specifically about what running a good retrospective means, or is the question about what a retrospective is? What's a good retro? Okay, so we understand what a retro is. What makes a good retro? Again, I'm going to talk about psych safety. It's where people actually are able to speak their minds, are not holding anything back, and transparent with their thoughts. There's different formats you can use, and there's different ways to help people surface their emotion there. What's a retrospective? A retrospective is usually at the end of a sprint, where we will look back at how our sprint went. So in Scrum, for example, we have 2-week sprints in which we plan work, and then we plan to deliver work or output by the end of the 2 weeks. And then we'll look back at the end of 2 weeks and how do we do? And we'll usually talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and with create actions to improve. And this is a really good place for controversial things to surface. So people usually say, oh, I couldn't do this because I was blocked by the other team, we were dependent on them, or we did really well because we all gelled really well as a team together and we really like working with this group of people, that kind of thing. There's lots of different formats you can try, and I think running a good retro can be a talk in itself, to be honest. I hope that answered your question.
There are lots of really good talks and books on retrospectives. So yeah, I think as Avi says, it's a really crucial aspect of becoming a mature, adopters of Agile ways of working and practices, not least because retrospectives are reflective sessions which are really geared towards ongoing continuous improvement, which my own experience is really what ultimately is at the heart of Agile, and teams that really embrace retrospective are committed to continuing to improve, which I think is the heart of what most of us are trying to help teams with. But there's lots of great books. Probably worth starting with maybe a seminal text, the Agile Retrospectives, book by Dara Larson and Esther Derby. That was the first kind of real, I think, main sort of text on the subject. But yeah, lots of good content literature online about the value and importance of retrospectives. Yeah, thanks for the question.
We've had another question from Olivia.
Yes, I think this is one I missed from earlier.
Why was there less empathy over the past 30 years? I couldn't tell you specifically right now, but what I can do is share the research with you afterwards, if that's okay, where we share the link and the slides, etc.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can definitely do that. If you've got some other references you'd like to share with your deck, and once we put the recording in, we'll happily circulate them. I think it is a curious one, I have to say, because I when you asked the question, I deliberately answered more because I feel like we have become more empathetic, because I think certainly with what we saw previous generations, there seemed to be less empathy. We've kind of become more humanized, and we think more about these things, and there's more understanding of, psychology and, neuroscience and all these things. So I was fascinated. So it'd be good to see that research and try to understand a little bit more about what's happened there and why that's the view, or if that's the conclusion. Yeah, definitely. So another question, Paul. Let me check. Sorry, do you want to say something?
No, it's the question. I was about to answer Martin's question.
Martin's question. So what would be the first thing you would recommend doing, reading, watching, to learn more about empathy and put it into practice for anyone early on the Agile journey?
So one book did it for me, actually. One book really got it rolling for me, and it's called Crucial Conversations. I don't know if you can see that. It's called Crucial Conversations. It's by Joseph Grenny, Kerry Patterson, Ron McMillan, Al Switzer, and Emily Gregory. There's a lot of authors, but I would highly recommend that. That completely changed my outlook on how to have challenging conversations. It's from there I started to actually give feedback to others, and then when I saw that they were appreciative of it, and then it actually led to better relationships, I was like, yeah, there's something in this.
I would agree with you, but I would recommend a different one which had a similar effect on me, which was non-violent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. So I've referenced that in a few talks. Similar thing I would have thought. So I think both would be good. I'll find a link if I can for that one.
Another
conversation.
The Coaching Habit, Michael Bungay, I think his name is. Also a really good book. Just helped me with my one-to-one approach as well, just to understand the coaching mindset. What I would say is it's really difficult because when you take a coaching approach, you want to answer people's questions and frustrations for them, but it's actually stopping yourself from speaking and hearing them speak and giving them that space to speak. It's something we need to practice.
Well, I've just put a link, folks, into the chat, which is a link I've just dug out on Amazon for the book that Avi's recommended. Hopefully I got the right one. Crucial Conversations. Joseph Grenny, right. Is that it? Yep. Looks like it's multiple authors. Okay, yeah, that's great. I'll add that to my reading backlog. I've got one of them. Any other questions from anyone? Let me just dig this one out. Thank you for the question, Alex. With tactical empathy, how do you test your assumptions about what emotions you think someone is feeling before you label the emotion and say things like, you seem upset, angry, etc.? Great question.
That's a great question, Alex. Thanks for that. I would refer back to some of the things I talked about already. I think sometimes you're having a conversation, and it's like you're watching yourself have the conversation, and you're watching them. It's like a meta approach to the conversation. So you're watching them, you're picking up on the non-verbals. We can equate tone of voice, expressions, body language with certain emotions, and so that will be revealed as they're speaking. Sometimes we don't get it wrong. Sometimes we do get it wrong, sorry. And sometimes I ask the question, how do you feel about that? If I'm not picking it up, obviously, how do you feel about that? And this is where they will surface how they feel, and then you repeat it back to them, and that makes sure that they know that you understand how they feel. Does that make sense? Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Any more? Any other folks? As I say, you're welcome to raise a hand or unmute. That's See any raised hands or any questions? Anything from any of our committee members? You want to ask anything? Expand on what Avi's been talking about, your own experiences? No? You've stunned everyone into silence.
Yeah, I'll say that. Yeah, really enjoyable talk. Lots of food for thought. I like the question you asked about, whether you believe there's more or less empathy. I thought the answer was yes, and then you turned around and said it was no. And I thought maybe people's understanding of empathy has expanded, but the application isn't there. And maybe that's gone down, because I still feel you can talk about empathy more, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's not. There's not as much empathy in action out there as one would think. But yeah, it's interesting. Something I'll probably look into.
Yeah, appreciate that. That was a surprise to me as well, because before this I actually thought that we were more empathetic now than we were previously, but apparently not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Aman makes a good point. I think the term has significantly greater ubiquity, right? It's something we hear a lot, we talk about it. Doesn't necessarily mean we're practicing it, but it certainly features a lot more. We do talk a lot more about empathetic leadership. I'll talk about that in some of my talks. But yeah, that's probably a good point, actually. Are we getting better applying it? And I think we're also at a stage where I think pace of things and the expectations on people and impact on our concentration spans and context switching, they might all be contributing factors as well.
And we tend to, a lot of countries across the world are divided politically with zero empathy towards the other side as well. Controversial, but yeah.
There's another comment coming in here. This is that's maybe a follow-up from Alex. Yeah, people film others having breakdowns and post them on social media. Yeah, that's a good point. You do see people posting some horrendous things, and you find yourself thinking, well, rather than you filming that and standing by as a sort of casual observer, why don't you actively go in and sort of help someone out? Yeah, it's a very good point, actually.
Yeah, it's true.
Very good point. Okay, maybe time for one more. If there's a final question from anyone, I'm happy to start wrapping up and giving everybody back a little bit of time. Any other comments, thoughts for the group, thoughts for the speaker, final questions? All of the above is welcome.
I would say that whilst what I was talking about, as I was talking about it, may have seemed quite kind of, yeah, that's just common sense. It's very hard. It's very hard to actually do, because our opinions, especially if they're strongly held opinions, will get in the way of us doing these things. And I would say this is something you need to practice. And if you find yourself, if you feel your blood boiling or losing patience, you've got to find a way to calm yourself down and actually ask that question. So if you're in the midst of an argument, to suddenly say, okay, I need to understand this person better, that takes a lot of cognitive processing. And so I guess what I'm saying is, it seems simple on the surface, but try it and it will be, you'll find it challenging, but it'll definitely be worthwhile.
I think it's a great final thought. I think with a lot of these sort of practices, where they're kind of, you said it nicely earlier, that they're kind of seen as being on the softer side, but they're really crucial to ongoing success in the workplace. I had sort of similar conversations today and last week in some of my own teams, but they do require practice. They require you to sort of step back from them. I also think you mentioned it a few times in your own sort of way, but I think we all have biases. We have a few talks where I talk about that, and I think you have to find ways to understand what your own biases are and things that could affect your view of a situation, and step back from those and try to see them through a different lens. So that's really, really good. So yeah, great. Lots to reflect on there, actually. Right, you've admirably answered a whole bunch of questions. This is your, if you want to reach Avi or listen to his music, you can do that as well. Share the QR code. You can reach out to him on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. Change the name again. And then also feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm sure he will.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining, attending, and Avi, thanks for being our speaker for August. It's always nice to hear from you. So it's nice to chat to you, and I do enjoy your talks because they align pretty closely with the things that I'm also very passionate about. So yeah, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate
just a couple of other quick announcements before we call it. So the team and I, we are, for September, we are working on an in-person event. We're just trying to finalise a few things with some of our colleagues in the BCS HQ. So hopefully we'll get that sorted imminently, but we will be hosting an in-person unconference event, full day event for you in September. It will be on the 22nd. So we're hoping to publicise that very, very, very soon. So you'll see it on, our various channels of communication, come through our but we'll post it out through our email communication. You'll see it on our LinkedIn group. You'll see it on our, I was going to say Twitter as well, our X channel. I don't know what to call it. Whatever it's called. So do look out for that. And if you are going to be in London on the 22nd, we'd love to see you in person, because many of the committee will be in attendance. I'm flying down for that. And we'll have a number of things available to you. We're looking to do some lean coffee style, sessions. We'll have, a couple of keynote talks for you. We'll have the opportunity to participate in World Cafes, a range of things to help you to engage in some of these sorts of interactive forums that you can create to, as Avi's, demonstrated today, to really bring people into conversations, hear from everyone, surface the unheard voices, create greater engagement, greater empathy, start to learn a little bit more about how you can apply some liberating structures, etc. So we're looking to run a day of events where all of that will be on offer. And really, we are targeting those who are new to these things. So if you want to learn more about all of that, keep an eye out for forthcoming communications, and we'd love to see you on September the 22nd once we get our event published. So thank you all again, greatly appreciative of you taking out the time and joining us today on behalf of the BCS Agile Methods Group. Thanks again, and we hope we'll see you again in the future. Thanks again to Avi for a great talk.